That one person at a party who somehow knows everyone in the room within 20 minutes of arriving? They're laughing, they're hugging strangers like old friends. They're somehow already giving a toast, and you're standing in the corner thinking, how? How does this human work? Well, today we're cracking open the brain of that person. And here's what's wild. What's going on inside an extrovert's head is not what you think. It's not just they like people. There is actual science, actual brain chemistry, and honestly, some pretty fascinating psychology behind why extroverts are the way they are. And if you are an extrovert watching this, oh, buddy, you're about to understand yourself on a completely different level. So stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at the loudest person in the room the same way again. Let's start with the basics, but not the boring textbook basics. Most people think an extrovert is just someone who's loud, talkative, and loves attention. And yeah, sometimes that's true. But the real psychological definition goes much deeper. The concept of extroversion was first introduced by the legendary Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. Yes, the guy whose ideas still shape psychology in 2026. Jung described extroverts as people who are oriented toward the external world. Their energy, their focus, their whole sense of self, it gets drawn out toward people, environments, and experiences. An introvert pulls energy inward. An extrovert pushes energy outward. Think of it like this. Imagine your brain is a phone. An introvert charges by being alone. Quiet room, no notifications, recharge complete. An extrovert? Their phone charges by being plugged into other people. Social interaction is literally their power outlet. And here's the thing nobody talks about. When an extrovert is alone for too long, they don't just get bored, they actually feel drained. Their mental battery dies. Some extroverts have even described it as feeling weirdly empty or anxious when they haven't had human connection for a while. Not because they're clingy, not because they're needy, it's just how their brain is built. And speaking of how their brain is built, brace yourself for this next part. Because the reason extroverts are so energized by people has everything to do with a chemical inside their skull. And it might just change how you see every extrovert you've ever met.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Science has found that extroverts and introverts actually have different levels of dopamine sensitivity in their brains. Dopamine is your brain's reward chemical. It's the stuff that fires when something feels good, when you eat great food, when you get a compliment, when your team wins. It's basically your brain's way of saying, yes, more of that. Now here's the twist. Extroverts have a more active dopamine reward system, which means their brains are constantly seeking out stimulation because that's how they get their dopamine hit. And what gives the biggest hit? Other people, new experiences, excitement, noise, energy. A study from researchers at Harvard actually found that extroverts have higher activity in specific brain circuits associated with reward processing. So when an extrovert walks into a room full of people, their brain is literally lighting up like a pinball machine. Ding, bang, bang, dopamine, 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 dopamine. Meanwhile, an introvert walks into the same room, and their nervous system is like, that's a lot, let's process this quietly from the back. Neither response is wrong, they're just wired differently. And this dopamine difference explains so much about extrovert behavior. Explains why they love meeting new people. New people are new stimulation, new dopamine. It explains why they hate sitting still for too long. It explains why you're usually the ones who say, come on, let's go out tonight, while you're already in your pajamas at 8 p.m. They're not being annoying. Their brain is literally asking for its fuel. But wait, here's something that'll make you go, huh. If extroverts are so social and outgoing, why do some of them feel secretly insecure? Why do some of the most extroverted people also seem to need constant validation? What is that about? This is the part most videos on extroversion skip. So pay attention. Extroverts are great at starting conversations. They're great at making friends, breaking the ice, filling the silence. But here's what nobody says out loud. Some extroverts struggle deeply with being alone with their own thoughts. Because when you're always seeking external stimulation, you sometimes never develop the habit of sitting quietly with yourself. And that can become a problem. Think about it. If every uncomfortable emotion you have gets immediately drowned out by going out with friends, texting someone, or jumping into the next social situation, when do you actually process those feelings? Psychologists call this emotional avoidance through stimulation, and extroverts can be prone to it without even realizing it. They're not running toward people all the time. Sometimes they're running away from silence, from themselves, from thoughts they haven't dealt with yet. This is also why you'll sometimes notice extroverts who seem super confident and fun on the outside, but who fall apart when they're going through something difficult and suddenly can't be around people. They haven't built the internal coping tools because they've always outsourced their emotional regulation to the outside world. Now, does this mean extroverts are emotionally weak? Absolutely not. It just means that self-awareness is a skill that every personality type has to actively work on. And for extroverts, the specific thing to watch out for is, are you socializing because it genuinely fills you up, or are you using it to avoid something? Deep stuff, right? And we're just getting started. Because here's what almost nobody talks about. Extroverts actually make better leaders in certain environments. But in other environments, they can completely crash and burn. The difference is fascinating, and it has everything to do with how their brain handles pressure. There's a reason extroverts tend to dominate boardrooms, classrooms, stages, and screens. Studies show that extroverts are more likely to be perceived as natural leaders. Why? Because they speak up, they take charge, they're comfortable with visibility. When a group needs someone to step forward, the extrovert usually does it without overthinking. In 2026, in a world that's more connected and social than ever, through social media, content creation, live events, networking, extroverted traits are genuinely rewarded. Extroverts often thrive in environments that demand energy, communication, persuasion, and quick thinking under pressure. Think about the classic extrovert professions: politicians, teachers, salespeople, public speakers, actors, entrepreneurs. These roles require the exact things extroverts are naturally wired for. But, and this is a big but, research from Wharton Business School found something surprising. Extroverted leaders actually perform worse when they're managing proactive, creative employees who already know what they're doing and want autonomy. Because extroverts love to talk, they love to share their ideas, and sometimes they accidentally talk over the very people who have the best solutions. They dominate the conversation when they should be listening. The best extroverts learn to harness their natural charisma and develop the discipline to listen deeply. That combination, unstoppable. And it's funny, the extroverts who go on to truly change the world are usually the ones who spent some time understanding introverts. Because when an extrovert's energy meets an introvert's depth, that collaboration hits different. Here's a question I want you to sit with. Have you ever met someone who seems extroverted in social situations but is actually exhausted by it all? Or someone who loves people but also needs recovery time? Well, that might not make them an introvert. There's actually a third thing, and most people have never heard of it. Let me introduce you to something called ambiversion. An ambivert is someone who sits in the middle of the introvert-extrovert spectrum. They're social, but not always. They like people, but need a long time too. They can work a room when they need to, but they also love a quiet night in. Here's the shocking part. Psychological research suggests that most people are actually ambiverts, not extreme introverts or extroverts. The pure extrovert, the one who literally never needs alone time and is always 100% energized by people, is actually less common than pop psychology makes it seem. What this means is that introversion and extroversion are not boxes. They're a spectrum. And where you fall on that spectrum can even shift based on context, mood, age, and life experience. For example, a person might be highly extroverted at work but introverted at home. They might love big concerts but hate networking events. They might have 500 social media followers they interact with daily, but only 2 close friends they call in a crisis. Personality is not one-dimensional. Humans are complicated. And the more we try to label ourselves as one thing, the more we miss the beautiful messiness of who we actually are. So if you took a personality test in 2018 and it said you were an extrovert, great, but you're allowed to have changed. You're allowed to be somewhere in the middle. You're allowed to be a social butterfly on Fridays and a hermit on Sundays. That's just being human. Now here's something that's going to flip everything on its head. Can an introvert become an extrovert? Can extroversion be trained? Because neuroscience in 2026 is saying something wild about brain plasticity, and the answer might surprise you. For a long time, psychologists believed that personality traits were largely fixed by early adulthood. You were either wired extroverted or you weren't. End of story. But modern neuroscience, especially research in the last decade, is telling a much more nuanced story. Brain plasticity means that your brain can change based on your behaviors and experiences. The neural pathways you use most grow stronger. The ones you ignore can weaken, which means, to a certain extent, you can train yourself to become more extroverted or more introverted depending on what your life demands. Shy introverts who consistently push themselves to socialize often report that over time, it gets easier, not because they become a different person, but because their brain builds new pathways that make social interaction feel less threatening. And extroverts who deliberately practice solitude, meditation, deep reading, and journaling often find they become more comfortable with their inner world. They develop what psychologists call introvert muscles. This doesn't mean your core temperament vanishes. An introvert won't suddenly love parties. An extrovert won't suddenly crave silence 24/7. But people are far more flexible than we've been led to believe. The real takeaway: don't use your personality type as an excuse or a cage. Use it as a map. It tells you where you naturally go, but it doesn't tell you where you can't go. And let's talk about relationships for a second, because extroverts in romantic relationships are something else. They love hard. They communicate constantly, but they can also accidentally make their partners feel overwhelmed or unheard. So how do extroverts actually love? And what do they need in return? Love language? For most extroverts, it's words of affirmation and quality time, with an emphasis on active, social quality time. Extroverts tend to fall in love fast. They're not afraid to express their feelings. They'll text you first. They'll tell you how they feel. They'll introduce you to all their friends before you've even decided if you like their friends. They're enthusiastic partners. Warm, expressive, affectionate. The kind of person who plans surprise date nights and genuinely gets excited about your stories. But here's the real talk. Extroverts can be unintentionally overwhelming. If they're dating an introvert, and statistically speaking they often are, because opposites genuinely do attract, they can flood their partner with constant social invitations, constant communication, and constant energy. And the introvert eventually feels like they're drowning. Meanwhile, the extrovert is sitting there going, why don't they want to spend time with me? Don't they love me? It's not rejection. The introvert just needs to breathe. The extrovert-introvert relationship is one of the most common pairings in the world. And the couples that make it work, they learn each other's recharge styles. The extrovert learns to give space without taking it personally. The introvert learns to communicate their needs without disappearing entirely. It requires a lot of honest conversation, which, ironically, extroverts are usually pretty good at. There's something really beautiful about the way extroverts love. They hold nothing back. They're not playing it cool. They're all in, sometimes before the other person is ready. But that kind of openness, in a world where so many people are afraid to be vulnerable, it's honestly kind of rare. And here's one last thing I want you to think about. We spend so much time classifying people: introvert, extrovert, ambivert. But the most psychologically healthy people aren't the most extroverted or the most introverted. They're the ones who understand themselves. And that understanding, that's what we're all really after, isn't it? Let me end with something personal and real. Extroverts get a bad reputation sometimes. They're seen as shallow because they're talkative. They're seen as attention-seeking because they're comfortable being seen. They're called loud, invasive, exhausting. But here's the truth. Most extroverts are deeply warm people who genuinely love connection. They talk a lot because they care. They invite you everywhere because they want you around. They're enthusiastic about your life because your life actually interests them. Yes, they can be a lot. Yes, they sometimes need to read the room better. Yes, they can dominate conversations without meaning to. But behind all that energy and all that laughter and all those social plans, there's usually someone who just wants to feel connected. Someone who lights up when the people they love are around them. Someone who genuinely believes that life is better when you share it. And in the world where people are increasingly isolated, increasingly online, increasingly behind screens, even in 2026, the extrovert's relentless desire for real human connection, that's not a flaw. That's kind of a superpower. So the next time you see that person at the party, the one who somehow knows everyone, who's already giving the toast, who's dragging you onto the dance floor when you absolutely did not plan to dance tonight, maybe don't roll your eyes. Maybe just let them drag you. You might actually have a great time. All right, so here's what we covered today. Extroverts are wired for dopamine seeking through social stimulation. Their brains are literally built differently. They have incredible strengths in leadership, communication, and connection, but real blind spots around self-reflection and emotional processing. And whether you're an extrovert, introvert, or somewhere in the beautiful, messy middle, understanding your own psychological wiring is genuinely one of the most useful things you can do for your life. If this video made you think about yourself or someone you know differently, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Seriously, tell me, are you an extrovert, an introvert, that one ambivert who's exhausted by both labels? Let's talk about it. And hey, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, first of all, thank you. You clearly love learning about the human mind as much as I do. So here's what I need you to do. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because every alternate day, we go deep on psychology, human behavior, personality, and all the fascinating, weird, wonderful science of being a person. You've already watched this far. You might as well stick around. The next video, trust me, you'll want to see it. Subscribe. I'll see you there.